All right. So we have a wonderful group on today, and I'm so excited to just share this presentation with those that were not able to make it. So this conversation is about the future of human resources. Um, my name is Dr. Ryan Pride. I am an organizational psychologist and culture architect. We help companies build really wonderful places to work where people feel valued and cared about, where energy is high and momentum is high. And it really is all about, for us, it's just about getting human beings to connect, to be more transparent, to more authentic, and to manage their own human operating system. And I'll talk more about that. So let me dig in. I originally got into human resources because I wanted to help people and I wanted to bring people together. And when I think about what we're currently going through right now, there's so much divide in our country. There's so much divide across the world. We're seeing these divides of left and right, up and down, yellow and blue. It doesn't matter what the colors are. It's a basic divide and conquer thing that we see. And unfortunately, we've got our world is asking us to come together. And if you look at our current state, it's alarming in many ways because we've seen that stress has dramatically increased. It's tripled in the last 10 years. It's the number one reason why we see the doctor. We have so many things that we do to manage health and well-being, from an HR benefits perspective. And yet the number one driver of primary care visits is stress, right? So let that sink in for a minute. It's a really important thing. What are you doing in your company to manage stress? Often when we ask that, we don't get a whole lot, right? Like, well, we have a flexible work schedule and we have vacations, but that's not the answer because that stress that we feel, it's an internally driven phenomena, right? Like if I'm a miserable person, or I'm really unhappy and I walk into my multi-million-dollar house and I get out of my multi-thousand-dollar car, it doesn't mean anything. Those things don't mean anything. If I know every single thing about you externally, I can only predict about 10% of your happiness. So happiness is very much an inside job, and so is the management of stress. And so a big part of what we have to shift to in human resources is managing the internal space of the employees showing up to work every day. And when we look at that, we have to really look because happiness is changing. 50% of working adults today say that they are suffering. Has made our lives so easy. I can order food on my iPhone and watch a movie at the same time. However, while I've got all these beautiful conveniences, I also note that the iPhone takes a lot of my energy. It sucks my soul into it, right? Since the iPhone was released, we've seen a 400% increase in antidepressant use. Right. And depression in general has been increasing, right? Depression has increased. It's doubled every generation since 1920. And we've seen 1,000% increase in depression really since 1950. And that's only gotten worse during COVID. If you look at what has happened since COVID began, we've seen a threefold increase in depression. And that's why if you look at what workers are saying, right, 70% of workers surveyed said they would move to another employer if that other employer had practices for renewal, rejuvenation, right? So interesting. We're in an interesting time to be in human resources where what people are asking for is not time away from work. What people are asking for is ways to manage work in a way that doesn't feel so depleting. That what we're tired of is the internal suffering that's happening as a result of having to be someone, of having to be a role, right? 8 to 10 hours a day, and not being able to be our dynamic, full, messy selves. And so what people are hungry for is the ability to be authentic, They're hungry for, work that has, peaks and valleys, right? That there's times that we can manage our energy better, right? So that we're not showing up so depleted. They're looking for a company that cares about their well-being, and is more balanced in its approach to work. And it's interesting, when I started looking into the data for this presentation, I really wanted to know, like, how are we doing in human resources? What are business leaders saying about us? And I found this, and I think this is really interesting, that 40% of people that are working from home right now, or are in a hybrid schedule where they're at work sometimes and sometimes not, have experienced an increase in their workload. And so we're working more, even though we're working from home. And what's interesting is that when you survey those same people and you say, hey, kind of where are you at mentally? Most people say that they're suffering, and 20%, like 1 in 5, say they're on the edge of a mental breakdown. Now, that's just like, if you think about the human condition and what we're all working for, 1 in 5 people on the verge of a mental breakdown because of work is just, it's just not acceptable. And part of the issue that we have to face is that we've never been more connected, right? We can get on meetings all day. We can see people just like I'm seeing you right now, but we've never been more disconnected in some ways, right? We know each other by name and role, but we don't necessarily know each other in heart and soul. And so the issue for me is that our world is changing rapidly. And all of the data that we see is communicating to us that we need to come together. We need to be more aligned. And that starts in our workplaces. And I'll tell you why it does, because 75% of Americans are disengaged at work. 75%, 3 out of 4 people are unhappy. They're tired. They're joyless. And that matters, because if you look at the research on pro-social behavior, pro-environmental behavior, if you want to call it that, it's very clear. The number one predictor of pro-social, pro-environmental behavior is mood. A study I always talk about is this trash study where they put trash on the sidewalk and they wanted to see who would kick it versus who would stop and pick it up and put it in the trash can. And the number one predictor was mood. If you're in a good mood that day, you pick it up. If you're in a bad mood, you kick it out of your way. And, boy, doesn't that speak to the issue at hand. Is that if we are chronically in a bad mood because of work, or we're exhausted because of work, we don't want to do anything more for the world. We don't want to do anything more for our fellow people, because what we need is time to check out. We need time to just veg. And this is why the average human being watches about, I think if you model over the course of your lifetime, about 13 years of your life will be spent on the screen. And I guess I'm not helping right now because you're sitting here watching me on the screen. So what we do at the Moksha Group, we're a culture shaping firm. We are one of the only firms in the world to focus exclusively on culture. We're following in the footsteps of giants like Sid Delaney, although we do our work in a different way, right? Because we're bringing in neuroscience, we're bringing in mindfulness, we're bringing in research from the last 10 years, which have completely changed the game and what we understand about how the human brain works and how it connects to other human brains. I want to share a model of organizational health with you that I think will be really important. This model comes from Tony Schwartz. And I want you to notice something. So if you look at like what makes an organization work, right? Fundamentally, you have to have 4 things in alignment. So what is the mindset of people coming to work every day? What are their thoughts? What are their beliefs? What are their motivations? What is their emotional state, right? It's mindset. And then how do they actually show up? What do they say? What do they do? How do they perform? What are their skills? What are their goals? We know that world very well. And if you go to the bottom half of this model, so by the way, this model is based on, what's inside of us versus what is outside of us. And then it's the individual level at the top and the organizational level at the bottom. So you get all facets of the human spectrum, the internal, the external, the individual, and the collective. So at the bottom half of this model, you see that structure really matters. Like, what are your resources? What is your level of technology? What is an environment you're working in? What are your facilities like? And on the left-hand side of this model, still on the collective side, you see culture, values, mission, stories, shared beliefs, shared norms. Now, the most important thing to look at in this, for me, is to look that this is a total model of organizational health, which means that all pieces of the pie matter. And yet the left-hand side of this model, right? I'm just going to go back to the model again, is completely invisible. You don't see it. You can't observe it. It's very difficult to measure. And yet it really matters. The thing is, we don't often play here because it is invisible. It is unseen. We stay away from it. There's not a whole lot of people that do training on emotions. There's not a whole lot of people that do training on mindset. Even when they get to culture, the way that they try to fix culture is with external things, right? It's mission, vision, value statements. It's painting the walls a brighter color of yellow. It's maybe, putting in ping pong tables if you're in Silicon Valley. However, these are external solutions to an internal problem, and this internal thing, right? The mindset of people showing up to work every day, their level of energy, their mood, their morale, those show up in behaviors, right? And all of the structural things that you put in place, policies, systems, processes, can be completely undone by culture. And I know I've seen it. I used to be a vice president of HR. I can remember vividly an employee who literally cut off his finger, in one of our furniture manufacturing facilities because he did not follow the safety procedures. He went through 2 weeks of safety training before starting his job, but all of that was undone because the first day he was on his job, he did all of the safety procedures, and here comes Bob, and Bob was like, "Hey there, boy, that's not the way we do it around here. You're a newbie. You don't need all that stuff." And so, that's like one 1 minute of somebody, expressing how culture works, and 2 weeks of system process training are completely undone. And so it matters, and it matters a lot. James Heskett, who's probably one of the best business researchers out there. He's a professor emeritus of Harvard. He did a long-term meta-analysis and found that 50% of operating profit, right, over time can be predicted by culture. Now, this is really important because that means if I put all of the factors of what shapes a company into a statistical soup, culture will account for 50% of the variance in operating profit over time. And I think, this data gets even more interesting when you look at the specifics, right? Like what were the differences between companies that had really great cultures and those that didn't? And you can see the numbers in terms of revenue growth and employment growth and stock price growth and net income growth over time. It's quite unbelievable. If I showed you these types of numbers in your investment portfolio, you would absolutely invest in culture. It would be a no-brainer, right? It's going to deliver huge returns. And yet we see so many people that don't invest in culture, or this is worse, they think they're investing in culture, right? They think they're investing in culture because they're doing mission, vision, values. They think they're investing in culture because they do an organizational survey or performance management or succession planning. That's not culture work. It's just not. Culture work is about getting people together. And that's not from a company party. It doesn't come from giving cute little reward and recognition programs either. Like those are great. I'm not knocking those things. They're important. We need those things. But the fabric of culture lives in the messiness of human beings. And if you can help human beings become more vibrant and more energized and more alive for their life, then culture becomes this amazing catalyst to business results. And so, I'm from the South, and let me tell you, if you want to see the power of culture, just look at the South, right? Like look at the Middle East. Culture is all around us. You can see that it not only shapes um, who we are, but also how we show up. And now this is when I said that our work is a little different, and we're bringing in some new work from Larry Sin. Let me explain what I mean by that. Is that neuroscience has now shown us the fabric of how that works, right? We know from interpersonal neurobiology, and I'm going to quote the work of Dan Siegel here, that whatever neuro cocktail you've got going on, you share it with the people that you work with every day. That means if you're really stressed out and you work beside somebody every day, just by them working next to you, they become more stressed out. So we share our neurochemistry. We wire and fire together. The idea that you are a separate entity is an illusion. You are connected to everything and everyone. Consciousness is very much a collaboration, right? You think different thoughts in the yoga studio than you do at the Department of Motor Vehicles, right? You are fundamentally, like, if I could measure your thoughts, you'd show up as a different person. That's because your environment affects you. The people that you're around affect you. And so a big part of what we have to look at is like what's happening in these spaces that exist between us, and is there an opportunity to change that? And the good news is absolutely yes, there is. We can change the way we feel internally. We can change the way that we manage that space between us. We can create more safety. We can create more belonging. All of that is within our possibility. Now, let's talk about HR for a minute, because HR typically focuses on culture. And the way that they do that is through mission, vision, values, competencies, and operating principles, service awards, right? It's, again, all of these externally visible things. And I want to dig into those a little bit, okay? So the argument that I'm going to put forward is that the real opportunity for the human resource partnering model is to move from human resources into resourcing humans. In other words, the more that you can give back to human beings, right, the more that you can energize, invigorate them, inspire them, give them tools to manage themselves, the more they will feel cared about and the higher they will perform. If you look at where HR spends most of its time today, it's in operations, right? Just look at the buckets. It's like payroll, it's recruiting, it's employee disputes, it's employee benefit questions, maybe workplace safety. We spend a lot of time there. And if you look at like what people are asking for, they're asking for something different, right? They're asking for something different from human resources. And I'm going to show you some of these things, in more detail. Let me just explain a little bit further. So let's talk about leadership, for example. If I were to ask you the good qualities and bad qualities of your leader, you could probably easily list those things. If I were to ask you about the worst leader that you've ever had in your life, you could list those qualities. If I were to ask you about the best leader that you've ever had in your life, you could list those qualities. The thing is that the qualities that you would list are typically not skills. They're not knowledge areas. It's not about their expertise. It's not even about their charisma, right? All of the things that we think about when we think about leadership. What typically gets listed when we do this exercise with teams is when we ask, what is a good leader? Tell me about the best leader you've ever worked for. The qualities that are often listed are, they care about me. They're empathetic, they're kind, they're compassionate. When we ask about the worst leader, the qualities that we hear are, they're kind of a jerk, they're a beehole, they're egotistical, selfish. And so great leadership isn't what we teach in management courses. It really comes down, it's more than just emotional intelligence, right? That's like, emotional intelligence is the tip of the iceberg, right? Because underneath emotional intelligence are feeling states, mood states, energetic patterns. It's compassion and empathy, right? It's the ability to see beyond just yourself, right? It's not being so stuck in your ego. It's being expanded, right? And that's an awareness conversation. That's a consciousness conversation. That's a completely different conversation than what we would typically have in a management course. And so when you look at culture And the impact of those kinds of leaders, what you find is that when you have leaders that are empathetic and kind and compassionate, you get these really amazing cultures. And Larry Sin, who's, the father of culture, he said culture is a shadow of leadership, that when you study culture over time, you can always roll it up to leadership behavior, leadership mindset, leadership energy patterns, leadership awareness. We model our leaders not just in what they do, but also how they feel. Low vibe leaders create low vibe cultures. And this is why Daniel Goleman said that the primal job of a leader is to create positive resonance in the people he or she leads. It's, and it's an interesting turnabout, right? Like your job as a leader, you don't think of it this way, but your job of a leader is primarily an emotional job. And, we're starting to see a shift. 12 years ago, when we sort of formed up the idea of Moksha and launched it in 2011, 2012, no one was talking about mindfulness. Nobody was talking about empathy and compassion. We started having this conversation, and it's such a beautiful thing to see it coming out now. It seems like every HBR or Forbes article these days is about, emotional intelligence, empathy, or mindfulness. Even the Center for Creative Leadership recently changed their model, and it's down in the lower right-hand corner there, where you see that their 8 resilience steps are all about being mindful, establishing social connections, savoring the moment. These are things that we've been talking about for 10 years. And it used to be, when we talked about this stuff, people looked at us like, what are you, crazy? You can't be doing this in a workplace. Like, this is way too frou-frou. And it's so odd. It's like the medicine that would make us feel better is often rejected, right? Like, it's like the thing that I know I need to do is I need to walk or do some exercise today. And what do? I go have another cup of coffee and I sit in my computer. So it's like the one thing we know would be so good for us, we reject. And I think it's similar. Like, workplaces really need more compassionate, empathy, kindness, and yet it's the thing that they're often scared of. It's too soft. It's too HR. And HR people, in many ways, have rejected these things because they did not want to look soft. Right? They didn't approach their business leader with this kind of work because they wanted to be a businessy person. And I'm telling you, that model is old, it's dead, it's a dinosaur. We can let it go. There are a lot of people that are still trying to hold on to the strategic business partner model, where I show up as an HR person with my tie on or my formal outfit, and I'm giving businessy advice and da 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 da. I'm telling you, that model needs to die. It doesn't mean that we let go of human capital metrics. It doesn't mean that we let go of our performance management process or our succession planning process, but the amount of work and effort that we put into those things is not equaling the return that we get, right? We spend so much time managing performance management and doing succession planning, and half the time people don't even use their succession plans. And when we, as external people, talk to business leaders about performance management, most of them hate the process, right? Like, business moves way too quick to have a meeting once mid-year and once at in-year. It is just not the way business works. We need to be talking every single week. Succession planning typically happens once a year, where we have these big talent reviews. But in an organization, you might lose half your team in the course of a year. People are leaving and coming and going. Like, we are in a different world, and we have to own up to what do we need today. And what we need today is mental health. We need mental health. We need physical health. We need emotional health, but we need mental health. It's a huge thing for us. And so that's what we're focusing on. And we are in this mindful revolution. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears for a minute. Let me talk about mission, vision, values. So much of the time people focus on mission, vision, values, but only 35% of employees actually feel connected to these. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't have a mission, vision, values? No, absolutely not. Mission, vision, values is critical. It's part of your employer brand. However, when we think about these things as being the galvanizing force, right? The thing that's going to make everybody row in the same direction, I think that's a faulty assumption. It's just not the way it works. The lower you go down in an organization, the less people feel connected to mission, vision, values. Now, some companies do it really well. So we have been a culture shaping partner with Driscoll's Berry Company. I can tell you, Driscoll's has the best values in terms of how it's implemented, how it's integrated in the system that I've ever seen. But what is it? They have 3 values. They have 3 values, and those 3 values are ones that everybody can get behind: humility, passion, trustworthiness. And that means humility. Let me just take that for example. Every single one of their leaders is operating in a way where they're trying to be humble, so that's a value that really works for that culture. But for the most part, by and large, when we study companies, we see that most people are not connected to mission, vision, values, and the research supports that. And so then we say, okay, well, what is it? What is it that really matters? And what we see is that, so I'm going to pull in some old research here from Gallup. Gallup says that if you look at engagement and you look at all the drivers of engagement, you see 2 factors that show up over and over and over again, right? Number 1, I have a friend at work. And number 2, my boss cares about me as a human being. Well, wow, big surprise. What actually makes workplace meaningful to me isn't the sexy mission, vision, value statement, right? What actually makes work meaningful to me is I like the people I work beside, and my boss is not a dirtbag, right? My boss actually cares about me as a human being. So it's not that we need to get away from mission, vision, values. It's just that we shouldn't put $1 million into it, And I've seen that before. I've seen $1 million mission, vision, value campaigns. And I'm telling you, that's not where you need to put your money. You need to put your money in your employees' well-being. That's going to give you so much more bang for your buck. Okay, let's talk about competencies. So when we travel from company to company, we see different competencies, different values, right? There's literally 1,000 different competencies. I'm an organizational psychologist. I study data for a living. And my biggest question with competencies is which one? Which one? Which one is the most important, right? I know from the research that conscientiousness tends to have really great predictive value, right? I know from the research that work drive tends to have really good predictive value. But what about the other 998 competencies that we see? How do you know which one is right? And so I think we need to maybe revisit this model of competencies, because most people in a company can't even list what their competencies are. And one of the things that we have found from our own work with leaders, right? And we've seen these transformations. We've literally given executive coaching to leaders, watched them flower. We've done measurement after the fact and seen their ratings go up by 40%. And what change did we do? Did we implement a competency model with them? Did they start, displaying more whatever competency? No, because that's very difficult. Our brains don't work that way. So instead, what we said is like, can we help this leader become more mindful? Yeah. Can we help this leader become more self-aware? Can we help this leader become more heartful, to move more from their heart than they do from their head? So here's what's so beautiful. If you get those 3 things right, self-awareness, mindfulness, and empathy, heartfulness, almost every single competency that you want to see will emerge, right? Trustworthiness, humility, passion, right? Empathy, like all the things that we want to see happen in a conversation will happen if the leader is just there for it, self-aware of what's coming out of his or her mouth, and more in their heart than in their head, right? That's a simple formula. And it all comes down to mindful awareness. It's all about mindfulness. And so this is why mindfulness has such a huge opportunity in workplaces. And it's not about sitting and staring at your belly button. It's not about doing yoga poses or getting your ass up in the air and doing downward dog. It's not about that. Mindfulness is about becoming very aware of when your energy is low and taking a pattern interrupt. Mindfulness is about, do I know that the words coming out of my mouth right now are going to be hurtful or helpful? The mindfulness is about knowing that when I'm starting to feel all pent up inside, I can breathe out. It's like these are tools for self-regulation, tools for renewal. These are human tools to manage the messiness of being a human being, because we are feeling-based creatures. Let's talk about training. So much of training is focused on knowledge, skills, and abilities, but only 25% of performance can be predicted by knowledge, skills, or abilities. Check this out. 75% of performance can be predicted by three factors. What is the individual's level of optimism? Do they believe they can do it? What is their capacity for resiliency? Do they get up when they've been knocked down? And how connected are they socially? Not just connected, not just like, a person is out there doing networking. Do they build relationships? Do they support relationships? Do they nurture relationships? These three things account for success way more than knowledge, skills, or abilities. In fact, it's a 75 to 25 ratio. And how many of you have ever been to a training on optimism? Not one, right? How many of you have ever been to a training on resiliency? Maybe. How many of you have been to a training on some type of knowledge, skill, or ability, right? A lot, all right. But that's not what drives success. And we need to actually rewrite the conversation. And I'll give you a perfect example of how mindset, right, can totally change results. This research is from Kelly McGonigal, and she found when she surveyed people, she asked, how much stress do you feel on a regular basis? And she surveyed 3,000 adults and then followed them across time and looked at life expectancy. She also asked, do you believe stress is harmful to you? And she found something very, very interesting. If you had a lot of stress and you believed it was harmful to you, you were 43% more likely to die. However, if you did not believe stress was harmful to you, even if you had a lot of it, you were in the lowest risk category. So strangely enough, believing that stress is bad for you can kill you. And I've seen this with my own research. When I was in graduate school, I did a research called the full plate experience, where we found that workload, right, which had always been believed to be a stressor, that workload was not a stressor until the moment when you felt like you could not do it, when you did not have control over it, when it was out of your hands, when there was a chance you might fail. The minute that you felt that, everything became very straining, right? So it's this internal perception which creates a heaven or hell out of life. So mindset really matters. And the way that we've worked on mindset is to sort of force feed or spoon feed our managers competencies and to give them the words to say. And I'm saying, why don't we shift our model? I think it's time. It's totally time to shift our model. Instead of having that kind of conversation, our work should be on renewal, rejuvenation, energy management, mood management, emotional intelligence, like raising the bar of self-awareness, helping with conscious communication. These are all things that we can do and will make a tremendous impact. And let me tell you how powerful mindset is, just to put this in perspective. People in Japan, right, started dying after a newspaper article did a big piece on overworking, they call it karoshi, that can lead to death. Soon after that article was released, there was another person that had karoshi, and then another, and then another. And then it became this very wild epidemic, isolated in many ways to Japan, where people developed the belief that overwork could kill them. And it actually did, right? It actually did. And we know how powerful the placebo effect is. Anywhere from 30 to 80% of a medical impact is because of the placebo effect. The belief that this thing will do what it's supposed to do. And the more you believe it, the more it's true, which means if I give you a white pill, it's not as effective as a blue and red pill, right? Because the blue and red pill works more of the time because it looks more authentic. And if I write the label of my brand on it, it's even more effective, right? So the more you believe it, the more the placebo works. And so I'm going to leave here by saying, look, the opportunity in front of us as human resources leaders is to start managing the human operating system, to know that our brains remember negative information way more than positive. In fact, it's a 5-to-1 difference, that what people really need is safety. What they really need psychologically is that the knowing that they can do it, that they matter, that they can accomplish their task. that they belong and they're a part of a tribe. These are things that are fundamental to our brain, and things that we can put in every single people process that we have. Because, when we look at the brain, we have to know that the human brain is basically wired for three things, and three things alone: safety, achievement, and belonging. And in fact, if you look at the Google study that was recently done on their teams, they line up pretty well to this, right? Like Google did a huge study on teams to figure out which teams were the best teams. And they found that number one factor was psychological safety. Number two was dependability, right? Doesn't that match with achievement, that we can get our work done, that I can depend on you? Structure and clarity, doesn't that have to match to achievement? The fact that we can get our work done. Meaning and impact, and doesn't that match to belonging? And so our brain is a tricky thing, but it is understandable, and we can learn to work with it. And so one of the things that we do at the Moksha Group is we help leaders become better leaders. We have executive assessments. We do executive coaching, and we can completely turn around a leader. So that is one thing that I feel like we do better than most. Our approach is not rigid. It's a very fluid, dynamic, holistic approach. We take an integral model. When we work with a leader, it's mind, body, heart, and soul. There is no stone that goes unturned. And we cover everything from what's going on in your family and in your relationships, to how you're treating your body, what you're putting in your what food you're eating. And we also talk about work, obviously, and the relationships that you have at work, and how those relationships could get better by you being more effective. So this is one aspect of what we help with. We work with teams. We not only do we help intact teams become healthier, but we also do cross-functional team coaching. So one of the things that we really like to do is get teams that have to partner together to help them coordinate, align, communicate better. And then, of course, our specialty is culture work. We work with systems to improve their culture, to create more dynamic workplaces where people feel cared about and seen, where leaders show up authentic and transparent, and people feel energized and inspired. We would love to help you. We partner with human resources groups all the time to revitalize HR. And we believe this is a next stepping stone. We've gone from a pair of hands that does operational work to a business partner that's valued. But the next step for us, we believe, is to become a catalyst, right? It's to actually perform like an enzyme reaction to a company, right? Like by our being there, we make things better. And the way that we do that is by actually working with the human operating system. So we would love to help you. You can go to our website, themokshagroup.com. You can reach out to me personally, Ryan Pride. I'm on LinkedIn. If there's anything that we can do to support you, please let us know. And I just thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to talking to you soon.